I'm Lou Waters. Cheryl Atkinson has the day off. Reputed mob boss John Gotti, guilty on all counts. The decision came down a little over 30 minutes ago. A New York jury found him guilty of 5 murders and murder conspiracy, 11 counts of racketeering, gambling, loan sharking, and obstruction of justice. The man once known as the Teflon Don now faces life in prison. The 7-man, 5-woman jury deliberated just a day and a half before reaching the verdict. CNN's Charles Feldman has been covering the trial and has a look back now at the events leading up to this guilty verdict.
Some have called it the mob trial of all mob trials. The U.S. government versus John Gotti, reputed godfather of the nation's largest and most powerful mafia family, the Gambinos. It came complete with one of the most dramatic courtroom confrontations in memory, the testimony of Salvatore Sammy the Bull Gravano, who turned against his former friend and alleged mob boss by becoming a government witness. The key charge against Gotti: he was the mastermind of the 1985 rub-out of mob boss Paul Castellano. Gotti associates, like these gentlemen who came to court day in and day out, now call Gravano Sammy the Rat. That's because he broke the mafia's strict code of silence, testifying he and Gotti actually sat in a parked car on the night of the Castellano murder, prepared to be backup shooters. While Gravano was on the stand, tension was high. The courthouse had to be evacuated when someone phoned in a bomb threat. 2 other bomb threats followed. And this trial showed that the Gotti clan, if nothing else, is media savvy. A parade of stars, invited by friends of John Gotti, came to pay their respects. Movie star Mickey Rourke, TV star John Amos, recording star Jay Black of the 60s group Jay and the Americans, and Anthony Quinn, who blasted Gravano for being what he called a snitch.
I was raised on the east side myself in Los Angeles, and that was the worst sin one could report.
Although the government called 37 witnesses in the 29 days of trial that followed opening arguments, prosecutors relied heavily on some 8 hours of secretly recorded FBI tapes of Gotti's own voice, a voice the government said that can be heard ordering a murder. As the trial wore on, tempers flared and exploded. The judge threatened to remove Gotti from the courtroom after Gotti blew a sarcastic kiss at the prosecutor. And a lawyer for Gotti co-defendant Frank Locascio was held in contempt of court after he got into a shouting match with the judge. Like all good dramas, this one had a subtext: fear. It drove the judge to keep the jury anonymous and sequestered. It was expressed by some nervous witnesses, and it undoubtedly played a contributing role in the jurors' deliberation. Charles Feldman, CNN, New York.
Charles Feldman has been in and out of the courthouse and will be back with us shortly with a live update on this John Gotti verdict and the ramifications of it. We're going to have to cut away and go on up to Brooklyn, where the defense in the John Gotti trial is about to give its reaction to the guilty verdicts we heard about an hour ago. John Gotti guilty on all counts.
Everybody ready?
Yeah.
Mr. Krieger, your reaction to the conviction verdict against your client, Mr. Gotti?
Extreme disappointment. A growing respect for my client, who has conducted himself on receiving this rather shocking news who has conducted himself upon receiving this kind of shocking news with enormous dignity and what would be another word, John?
With courage.
Courage.
And, he took it like a real man. And he has vowed that the fight is not over, ladies and gentlemen, and it's not, I warrant you.
Well, are you disappointed, Mr. Krieger, that the jury was not out very long? Does that suggest to you that they just didn't buy the defense argument for 1 minute?
Well, I guess one must conclude that, of course. But you're talking about matters which are extremely personal in the sense. What difference does it make to us whether the jury is out 1 hour or 1 week or 1 month if the verdict is a bad one? And we feel that this verdict was a bad one, Charles, and that it, unfortunately, in our opinion, and I think I say this on behalf of the 3 of us, that the jury did not give adequate consideration to the defense arguments, did not give more than that adequate consideration to the evidence and to the applicable law.
Well, are you planning to appeal this? What grounds are you planning to appeal this on?
The judge didn't allow you to put on a proper case?
There are many grounds that we plan to appeal, and without cataloging them, I can tell you this, that we are all confident, and as John Mitchell said, that when it became clear to us that if the jury was coming in this quick, it was probably not good news. What John told us all and Frank told us all was not, they were consoling us, as opposed to feeling sorry for themselves, saying that this fight will continue and eventually we'll win it. We believe there are sufficient reasons to overturn this conviction.
What are some of those reasons?
Now, I'm not going to detail at this point the various grounds on which an appeal will be based any more than I will detail the grounds that we will include in our Rule 29C, which will be filed within 30 days from now. But we are dissatisfied to our bones with the verdict, and we will not hesitate to pursue every remedy available to us.
Well, there are a number of things that we wish that the jury had been aware of, and perhaps the visceral reaction that led to this conviction would have been different had we been able to present what we believe to be appropriate evidence that would have had significant impact on some key portions of the government's case, including particularly the credibility of Gravano, including particularly the credibility and accuracy, if you will, of the government's tapes and transcripts, and including particularly, probably most particularly, the credibility of Sammy Gravano.
Mr. Cardinale, Mr. Krieger said that he spoke for all three of you, and he said that he didn't think the jury gave enough time or deliberation to the evidence, but doesn't that fly in the face of the fact that in regards to your client, Mr. Locascio, they were very specific in finding him not guilty of one count?
Well, that's the part that we can't understand because it really doesn't make sense. In the course of the RICO conviction, what they did was they found him guilty of that as a predicate act in the RICO, and then somehow found him not guilty on the substantive count. It's inconsistent, but it demonstrates to us the fact that they really didn't, unfortunately, give it enough attention or test the case sufficiently. I mean, it just doesn't make sense that they found him not guilty of the substantive count, and they should have.
Mr. Krieger, you said that you have a growing respect for your client.
Some local cable operators will be cutting away for a commercial message at this time. CNN live coverage of the Gotti case continues.
In my respect for him and an unfounded jury verdict.
Do you think the jury believes Sam Gravano? Do you think the jury believes Sam Gravano? Closer to the mic.
I'm inclined to think that they must have accepted Sam Gravano's testimony. And maybe it's because I'm too objective and analytical in my view of the evidence, and I do not give enough credit to the jury in reaching its verdict based upon a bias or a prejudice or a perception of wrongdoing as opposed to that which was demonstrated in the courtroom. I stand by that which we urged upon the jury. For example, that the description of the Castellano homicide as given by Gravano is a fiction and was disproved time and again during our presentation of the defense. Now, why the jury concluded the way that it did can either be laid on the doorstep of we lawyers in not establishing something in defense, or, and this is the theory to which we subscribe, that the built-in perception of wrongdoing...
For those viewers rejoining us following a local commercial break, CNN is bringing live coverage of defense reaction to the guilty verdicts in the John Gotti trial in Brooklyn, New York.
Seek to fight uphill against uncharged crimes that consisted of a myriad of murders, of which the grand jury did not indict. Number two, jury tampering, which is literally throwing a snake into the jury box. We had to deal with all of the various allegations of Gravano. And I tell you, not one of us as defense lawyers were aware of the scope of Gravano's testimony until a day and a half before he got on the witness stand.
If you want to know really where we're going to go on appeal, following up on what Mr. Krieger said, obviously this verdict is not an analytical verdict. This is a verdict What plugs into that kind of an emotional response are all of the problems that Mr. Krieger has brought before you. This was an uphill battle to try and prevent perceptions of wrongdoing in this case. We had to fight constantly against the admission of uncharged crimes. We fought desperately to try and give a view of these defendants that was fair and balanced. We had a difficult time, and sometimes it was impossible to get evidence before the jury which would show the other side of these people. Now, if the issues that are ultimately going to be raised on appeal, the most forceful ones, are going to deal with the admission of these uncharged crimes, with the ability of the government to be able to try and put evidence before the jury, to make arguments to this jury, to taint them, to taint their view and prejudice their view against these gentlemen as a whole, to prevent them from doing what was necessary, and that was to analytically look at the government's proof and see whether or not it was there, to overcome the more emotional arguments and to go really to the meat of what was there, or in this case, what wasn't there.
Just to follow up,
Give me more of an idea.
just to follow up and give you an example of what we're talking about here. And I think I couldn't say it any better than John, but let me just say this. At the beginning of this case, Andy Maloney got up and gave an argument to this jury that they should decide the case not based on any emotion, not based on any fear, not based on any prejudice, but on the evidence. The end of the case, given the production that I suggest went into this to taint the jurors and to make them make a decision not based on any analysis, but rather on gut emotion, you saw what this case was all about when Maloney got back up and told this jury, basically, forget about the evidence, forget about analyzing it, convict because you should be afraid, convict because you should have prejudice, convict because these are bad men, not because we've proven it. And what he did in that type of argument was take away everything we tried to do in the course of the case, and that was to have the jurors have enough courage to test the case and to analyze it, because if they had done that fairly and without prejudice and without fear, they wouldn't have come to these verdicts.
Mr. Krieger, in all the years that you have been a defense attorney, which are numerous, have you seen a case quite like this? And if not, what makes this particularly novel?
No, I have not seen a case quite like this. And that begins with the jury itself, the sequestered anonymous jury. Secondly, with the price paid by the government for Gravano's testimony. I said it in the court, I say it here. Our country is sick to the core if it is willing to pay for testimony by literally absolving a person of 19 confessed murders. You heard the argument that he's going to do 20 years. I warned you. I'd like to have as many good years left as the number he will do less than 20 years.
More of an idea of what your client's reaction was he saying
Oh, absolute control of himself, supportive of each one of us. You have three lawyers here who are relatively passionate people. And we were hurt and stunned by the verdict. And our support came from John Gotti and Frank Locascio, each of whom, in relative selflessness and admirable selflessness, sought to give us consolation.
Absolutely. They were more concerned with consoling us than feeling sorry for themselves. There's never been any of that. They don't see this fight as over. It's not over. We're going to appeal these decisions. We're going to hope to get another opportunity to get before a petted jury and try this case again, and hopefully on a more balanced setting. You can do nothing but praise the amount of pluckiness and the amount of courage and dignity that these defendants had in this defeat.
Do you think the judge, gentlemen, gave you a fair fight?
Oh, we can't comment on the specific activities of court, prosecution, except in the areas in which we have met it on the public record. If we have any complaints about the court's conduct of the trial, well, there are appropriate forum in which we should raise that. And it is quite possible that some of the issues that we will raise at a later time will involve decisions made by Judge Glasser, but we really don't want to go beyond that.
Do you think that the fact that you could not bring in your witnesses had a lot to do with this conviction?
We believe
We
it.
believe so. We believe that had we been able to present that type of evidence, the jury would have had a far different view of what this case was all about. And we think that we were wronged in our inability to do that. And again, that's what appeals are for. And the one thing I can tell you about these gentlemen, too, is as they consoled us, was that they're realistic enough and experienced enough to know that this fight is, as they said, far from over. That we will continue and we'll be successful at another level.
Mr. Krieger, do we understand you correctly to say that bravado got up there and outright lied?
In many respects, absolutely. Unquestionably. And I look forward to the day when we can convince a petit jury of that. A wrong was done here.
What is the very next step, and when does that happen?
File our motion pursuant to Rule 29C, which has to be in
Within
30 days.
Are you gentlemen going to be handling the appeal?
We haven't talked about that,
haven't gotten that far.
with the clients as yet.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
The defense team in the John Gotti trial for Gotti and one of his lieutenants convicted of murder and racketeering, income tax evasion, and other. Bottom line for the defense, it was a tainted jury. It was an emotional verdict based on fear. We'll take a break. More on the Gotti story and other news when we come back.